broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second ICLEI webinar on Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues, taking place today, Wednesday, 21st March at 10 and 16 Central European time. My name is Jisun Hwang. I am Senior Climate Advocacy and Policy Officer at ICLEI World Secretariat. I will be a panelist as well as a facilitator of today's webinar. And on behalf of ICLEI, I would like to extend my heartfelt welcome to all of you. Before we start our webinar, let me give you a quick technical introduction to today's webinar. First of all, you are automatically on the muted mode, and I would like to kindly ask that you remain muted till the end of all the presentations. Second, there is a function where you can type in your questions during any time of this webinar. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use this function to type in your questions. Last but not least, in keeping with the principles of openness and transparency, this webinar is being recorded. Upon the closure of this webinar, all the PPT slides as well as the recording of this webinar will be shared with all the registered participants. With that, let me move on to introducing my fellow panelist, Mr. Yunus Arikan. Mr. Arikan is Head of Global Policy and Advocacy of ICLEI at ICLEI World Secretariat. He is also the local government and municipal authorities constituency focal point to the UNFCCC. Now with that, let us get started with today's webinar. So today's webinar will have these three components. First of all, I will give you introductions and I will share with you updates regarding the UN Bonn Climate Change Conference, April-May 2018. And I will then provide you with updates on the Talanoa Dialogue regarding its overview, as well as the updated guidelines emanating from the Presidency documents. And last but not least, Yunus will then provide you with the latest information regarding the Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues. So first of all, regarding the UN 2018 Bonn Climate Change Conference, we call this SB48, SB standing for subsidiary bodies. And as is known, there are two subsidiary bodies that are permanent, SUBSA and SBI, and one ad hoc subsidiary body, which is the APA. But since two permanent subsidiary bodies are having their 48th session, we call this SB's 48. It will take place from the 30th April to the 10th of May in Bonn, Germany, at the seat of the UNFCCC Secretariat. There are relevant tracks to the LGMA constituency, one of which is the official negotiations regarding various agenda items. And there are also parties working hard, of course, with a view to finalizing the Paris Agreement work program at COP24, which will take place in December this year, 2018. So the vast majority of the efforts of parties at the SB's 48 will be spent on working on and negotiating the details of the Paris Agreement work program. And now, in parallel, we also have mandated events that are mandated by governing bodies as well as subsidiary bodies. One of which is of quite of a high relevance to the local and regional government's constituency, which is a process called Technical Examination Process on Mitigation and Adaptation. This process is of importance because the outcomes of this session will be then feeding into the Talanoa Dialogue. As you know, the Talanoa Dialogue was launched at COP23 in Bonn in November last year to be a year-long process. The preparatory phase is ongoing, which started from January this year, and the political phase will then be during the COP, where ministers and other high-level delegates will then deliberate on the outcomes of the preparatory phase of the Talanoa Dialogue. And the SBS 48 will also feature, as usual, various side events and exhibitions. And these side events and exhibits will also focus on topics such as enhancing ambition, implementing NDCs, and also supporting the means of implementation. Now, we are now currently in the early stage of preparing for COP24. And then there's been some changes in the leadership of both the presidency and the incoming presidency. So if we look at the current presidency, which is Fiji, the presidency of COP23, we have received news that we have a new chief negotiator for the presidency, Ambassador Dialogue, and he will then be leading the process of the negotiations as Fiji's chief negotiator and as the presidency. And this year, being the year of the Talanoa Dialogue, he will be working closely with His Excellency Seruratu, who is the high-level champion of the current presidency. So, and based on this, we also have the Polish incoming presidency, and we have the champion, which is Mr. Khrushchev, Tomasz Khrushchev, Special Envoy on Climate Change from the Polish side. So these three people, Ambassador Dialogue and Minister Seruratu, and as well as Mr. Khrushchev, will be key figures, both leading and guiding parties and non-party stakeholders in the way towards COP24, and especially during the SBs when we have this Talanoa Dialogues session on the middle Sunday. These the leadership of these three people and their coordination would be quite important. And of course, when it comes to president, we still have His Excellency Prime Minister Bainimarara as COP23 president, and the incoming presidency for Poland. We still are in the wait and see mode, basically, as to who would actually be the incoming president, since there's been a leadership change in the Ministry of Environment in the Polish side as well. So for this, we are waiting to hear any updates, and as soon as we have news, we are happy to share with this group through this webinar regarding this the new president designate, or the who would be actually the president designate for the incoming presidency side. Now, let us move on to the Talanoa Dialogue. As I mentioned, this year is quite important. One, because parties will hopefully finalize the Paris Agreement work program at COP24. But at the same time, this year is the year of the Talanoa Dialogue, and this is a year-long process that will be quite instrumental in bringing all parties and non-party stakeholders together to discuss how to achieve NDC implementation, as well as to talk about methodologies to raise ambition of NDCs for the second round in 2020. There's been several milestone mandates regarding paving the way for the Talanoa Dialogue's current shape, which is an open and transparent structure where both parties and non-party stakeholders are invited to provide input. So the first mandate for the Talanoa Dialogue, which used to be called the Facilitative Dialogue, came during the Paris Conference in December 2015. And at that time, in order to assess collective progress towards the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement, the parties mandated this facilitative dialogue to take place in 2018. And then we also had this Bonn conference sessions, SBS 46 in May 2017. And under one of the agenda items under the SBI called Arrangements for Intergovernmental Meetings, one of the conclusions referred to the presidency's encouraging and holding an open dialogue where both parties and non-party stakeholders are invited to provide input seated side by side. Because for those of you who are familiar with the official proceedings of the plenary meetings of the UNFCCC bodies, it is the parties that speak first, parties and groups of parties speak first, and non-party stakeholders are invited to speak at the very end of the proceedings. But this open dialogue revolutionized this whole process by providing equal merit to the voices of parties and non-party stakeholders. Also, this was represented by the seating arrangements where parties and non-party stakeholders were seated literally side by side. So all these milestones helped shape the Talanoa Dialogue's current shape, which now invites parties and non-party stakeholders to both contribute significantly towards the deliberations of the Talanoa Dialogue. And in Bonn in November 2017, we had the COP23, and the Decision 1CP23, which contains an approach to the Talanoa Dialogue, comes to have this very open and facilitative structure of inviting both parties and non-party stakeholders. So based on these mandates, we are now engaging in the Talanoa Dialogue process. And ICLEI, as you know, is facilitating the cities and regions Talanoa Dialogues with special partners. And more on this, Yunus will provide updates. So just to give you the Talanoa Dialogue overview, as I mentioned, it has two phases. One is preparatory, the other one is political. So for the preparatory phase, it's a long preparatory phase of an year-long phase. And during the May sessions, we are having this Talanoa Dialogue based on the three questions of where are we, where do we want to go, and how do we get there. And as I mentioned, the technical examination processes has this element of technical expert meetings, which is called TEMS, on mitigation and adaptation, and that will also feed into the deliberations of the Talanoa Dialogues. And also during the first week of the COP, still we will finalize the preparatory phase of the Talanoa Dialogue. And also feeding into this discussion would be the IPCC 1.5 special report, as well as the synthesis report on the submissions to the Talanoa Dialogues to be prepared by the Secretariat. And the political phase, of course, will then go over all the three questions to see what actually, what political solutions can then be achieved to enhance emission and to fulfill implementation of nationally determined contributions, NDCs. So that is the Talanoa Dialogue overview for this year. Now, there's been a guidance document released by the presidencies through the Talanoa Dialogue website. It contains details as to how the May sessions Talanoa Dialogue will actually be conducted. So it has opening session, closing session, and in between there will be parallel discussion groups on each of the three questions. And the submissions deadline of 2nd of April will be used. So the submissions made up until then will be made into report, a synthesis report to provide further backgrounds to those discussions. And the date has been announced for the Talanoa Dialogue session during the May dialogues, which is 6th of May, which is a middle Sunday. Traditionally at the SVs, we never worked on a Sunday, but this time we have this special Talanoa Dialogue session scheduled for Sunday. So it is expected that both parties and non-party stakeholders will be engaging in in-depth discussions of the three questions of the Talanoa Dialogue on that Sunday, the middle Sunday between the 2 weeks. There will be parallel groups talking about the three questions sequentially, and each questions were dedicated about two and a half hours. And each group will have 35 participants, 30 from national governments and 5 from non-party stakeholders. And each of the groups will have a Fijian moderator. And each of the 35 participants is expected to share one positive and one challenging story regarding the implementation of NDCs and means of implementation, as well as enhancing the level of ambition. For the non-party stakeholders engagement, we will still have to see how exactly these engagements will be actually facilitated. And then for more details, as soon as we get more details, we are ready to share further details on this through this webinar. For the Talanoa Dialogue submissions, there's been also updates on this. The templates for each of these 3 questions has been released on the Talanoa Dialogue portal. So on the first question of where are we, the templates focus on the commitments that are ongoing and the progress made since the Paris Agreement adoption, as well as any impacts that can be quantitatively calculated. For the second question of where do we want to go, the templates focus on the vision of the ambition and any new commitments that will be made regarding this vision, as well as how to make linkages to other global frameworks like SDGs. And for the third question of how do we get there, the template focuses on the institutional frameworks, including the role of the UNFCCC regarding how the Secretariat can facilitate this how do we get there phase, and as well as concrete solutions, as well as how to enhance cooperation for NDC implementation. And this also includes any financing models, public and private. So these are some of the topics that are some of the guiding questions that are contained in the document, the template intended to be used by non-party stakeholders when they make submissions under these 3 questions. Let me touch upon briefly on the technical examination process at SBS 48. The session takes place on 2 policy areas. One is mitigation, the other one is adaptation. Each year there is a different theme. This year's mitigation theme has been announced to be industry. It'll be focusing on circular economies as well as waste reuse and prevention solutions. So any organizations that are working in these areas of circular economies are welcome to provide input by taking part in the technical examination meetings during the May sessions. The theme of adaptation this year will be on planning for vulnerable groups, communities, and ecosystems. So again, any non-party stakeholders who are having expertise in these areas are welcome to join the sessions. And this participation is particularly encouraged this year because these outcomes will feed into the Talanoa Dialogue outcomes. So that will be that has been the introduction on any updates emanating from the Presidency documents as well as the UNFCCC Talanoa Dialogue portal. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Yunus Arikan, who will give you more details on the current updates on the cities and regions Talanoa Dialogues. Yunus, over to you.
Thank you, Jisun. Because this first part was much more loaded compared to the previous webinars, I'm just loudly thinking with you whether we may open the floor for our colleagues, whether they have any questions technically or clarification, because we will be shifting to a bit more different themes. Anyone, maybe if there is any need, they can raise hands or they can intervene. We can just highlight this, but if not, I can continue. Of course, we see no hands at the moment. Okay, let me continue. Then maybe there can be any feedback afterwards. So as you have listened from Jisun, there is a global process going on, which is a unique in the history of UNFCCC, that's being tested a number of processes for the first time, especially engaging non-party stakeholders more actively in the process. And let's before going to what the cities and regions are doing, let's ask our questions: why are we doing this? There are four main reasons for us to be actively involved in this process. First of all, the Paris Agreement refers to all levels of governments to be involved in this process. So we feel that this is the first example of how we can be contributing in the Paris Agreement, which is slightly different than the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol era. Secondly, the Paris Agreement also at the same time gives more role to the national processes. So we know the global scrutiny, the global campaigning is important, but if we are focusing on the implementation, it is mainly driven at the national level, and therefore when they go to back home, the national governments are particularly excited or mandated to work with different levels of government. Therefore, we should be actively involved in this process. The reason why we are excited, which is the outcome in Bonn 2017, is that now this process, the Talanoa Dialogue, which is the review of NDCs and it is further improvements, are opened for local, national, and regional discussions. That was an opportunity that was decided or as a recommendation, and there is also the opportunity to intervene. This means that we have now available tools, available channels that we could make use of it. And the third one is that we, as local and regional governments, we asked for this process to be open and inclusive. It was our declaration in Bonn at the COP23. So we were recommending the national governments to take this process to a new level, and our efforts, our inputs are taken up by the nation. So therefore, we have to respond. We have to say that yes, you opened the process, you have all created mechanisms, and now we are filling in. One of the other reasons is that in just after COP, there was the Global Council of Mayors have also announced a call for NDC vertical integration. One of the key initiatives that came up after COP23, that also gives us the rationale to act actively in this process. There are another. We can ask why we are excited in a more political. The first one was procedural and legal framework, and now we also have to think of the substance. Why are we engaged with this Talanoa dialogues? If this is the opportunity for NDCs, we are aware that NDCs are not enough. They are not meeting the global goals of the Paris Agreement. So that is an alarming bell for us. Second, we all know urban communities, local and regional governments, or cities and regions are contributing, and they have been vulnerable. So they have to be at the core of the discussions. And the third, we already are aware, we have already commitments from globally, and we have a huge reduction potential, which we are not sure how much this could contribute to the global process, but it is on the table and is being implemented. And of course, we also have seen that there are several national governments who had made some contribution references to urban aspects or urban dimensions. We would like to check whether it is enough or how much this is engaged with local and regional governments. So there's already a basis that we can work on. And what we would like to achieve through this Talanoa Dialogue is that we will first like to translate the global process into our realities of local and regional governments. As you know, when we say non-party stakeholders, it includes business communities, it could include indigenous people, it includes action, grassroots organization. What is specific? What is the most relevant for us as local and regional governments? We have to be able to clarify this. Second, because now this is an implementation of the multi-level governance, this is an opportunity for us to demonstrate how this can be done in connection to other sustainability agendas. And the third, and probably one of the most important ones, is that in fact, through the Talanoa Dialogues, Paris Agreement is in fact coming home. We are bringing the Paris Agreement back to the review of all the stakeholders. Let's remember, Paris Agreement contributions were defined before Paris Agreement was adopted. So they were not aware that vision of multi-level governance would be embedded in Paris Agreement. They were not aware of how important roles would be actually captured in the Paris Agreement. So it is a time for us to make a reality check for existing NDCs and make sure that the next rounds are better designed. This process was led by, facilitated by ICLEI, the Cities and Regions Talanoa. We have special partners, UN Habitat and Global Covenant. The UN Climate Secretariat and Fijian government is helping us a lot, and all the members of constituency have been mobilized itself. We particularly launched it in Kuala Lumpur at the World Urban Forum in February, in particular to expand this debate to the urban community that is broader than what local and regional governments active in the climate process, because we know there is an urban community who have not been too much involved in the climate process, and there's also, including ministers of urbanization in some countries, they have not been too much aware of the climate contributions of their countries. So this is an opportunity for us to expand the community. Our first webinar of the year was in February, and now in this second webinar, where we are proud to share with you that out of all these efforts with all these partners, we can now announce that we have 24 events that is now having a big debate on Talanoa Dialogues, Paris Agreement, and NDCs. The first 5, or the first 7 actually, no. Sorry, 8 of them has already taken place, and starting from April onwards, there will be the rest of the 20 or so events will take place. You can find from this list that we are active in on almost all continents. And this is an inclusive process that all partners of the local governments and municipal authorities constituency are proposing their own events or designing their specific events, and it is a collaborative effort, and our task as ICLEI is to make sure that there is a coordination, or at least there's a synergy among all these events. We can proudly convey these messages to the UNFCCC, and we can come up with the strong messages to the dialogues in Bonn and in Katowice at the end of the year. These 24 events will not be the only opportunities. We are aware our partners, our organizations are already working internally that in the next couple of weeks we may expect to have new information coming up with the new list of events. But we are very proud because this is reflecting the diversity and ambition of our constituency. As I said, we have already started to test this process, and I would like to highlight here 2 experiences from Canada and Indonesia. And in fact, we have our colleague Sunandan Tiwari, who had been leading the ICLEI's project of ambitious promises in Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam. And I think in this question and answer session, he will also provide some experiences. In the case of Canada, for example, our strength was that we launched at the city's IPCC conference, and if you can see from the first picture, we have a minister of a national government, we have a political leader of a councillor of a city, and who's representing the network of the National Association. We have the city officials from Quito and Montreal, and we have experts. So this is reflecting the diversity that we want to see, and these 4 or 5 individuals, in fact, in the launch and their media event, they have addressed that this Talanoa Dialogue is giving us the collective opportunity to bring different stakeholders to go work and hear each other and make progress. And the same spirit was in Indonesia. In this picture, you can see the special envoy of the president of Indonesia, Mr. Rahmat Witolar, together with Minister of Environment, Planning, Urbanization, and then you can see here a couple of representatives of cities in Indonesia, like Jakarta, who is a well-advanced and well-experienced city as the capital. But we also have other cities, Bekasi, Tangerang, who are recently being encouraged to take a more active role in the climate action. So the diversity of the stakeholders, the diversity of their experiences is enriching our dialogues, and this is the beauty of Talanoa Dialogues, and we believe that will give us the power that we are ready to deliver the Paris Agreement and even go beyond what is at the table. And now we are going here in this discussions about how we want to lead this event. First of all, we would like to address that this is an initiative of the government of the city or the region or the network of local governments. But there will be some cases where national government may also be taking a leading role. We would like to hear from the ministers of environment, or ministers of climate of the respective government. And we would also like to invite ministers of urbanization or other line ministries like finance to provide inputs from their perspectives. And then we would like to have a debate, especially or presentation about what the local and regional governments in this country are or in this region are doing in terms of their emissions, their preparedness, their plans, their commitments. And then we would try to match all these discussions, saying that how much we could match these existing processes. Is there any gap? Is there any overlap? Is there any synergy we can think about? And depending on the capacity of the host, this can be a 2-hour or 3 hours event to 2 day sessions. We are expecting some events may be closed, some events may be public. And we are hoping that there will be some results coming up, and that's in that sense we're working with our partners to finalize our guidance document in how to track the outcome of this process of the meetings. Here is one of the most important discussion points. So this you have seen from Jisun that the presidency have released specific guidance on how to respond to the questions: where are we, where do we want to go, and how do we get there? When we say that, what does it mean for relevant, what is relevant for local and regional governments? We are trying to find an additional explanation or a further explanation of these questions. For example, when we are discussing where are we, the first question we can think about is that, is the sustainable urbanization literally or concretely addressed or included in the current NDCs? Are this plans are already reflecting our actions on the ground? Are these already in line with our local development plans? Or if not, how can we engage our actions from local and regional governments to the NDCs? So that will be the first type of questions we think could be coming up. So the second question is that, where do we want to go? How much we can raise the bar higher? How new projects, how new action plans, how new investments we can connect to the existing NDCs, and how much we can consider that the next round of NDCs can be much more ambitious than what is it at the moment put on the table. Because our logic is that the more different levels of governments can hear from each other, the more different spheres of government can talk to each other, they would understand that the climate transformation is taking place in all around the world, and NDCs, if they reflect it appropriately in approved mechanisms, in strengthened mechanisms, we could be much more confident that our NDCs are on track, they are implemented, and they're ambitious enough. And of course, all this cannot happen in the daytime. We would expect that some things can happen today, some things can happen by the end of this year, and there may be some things that we have to do in the years ahead. The year 2020 is important. That's the time when we are expecting the new versions of NDCs will be proposed. But it is even more important because this is a long-term goal, and it's especially in the local and regional governments. The lock-in effect, the investments of our cities today will define the carbon intensity of our futures. Therefore, there should be a long-term preparations, and this should include technical changes, financial regulations, policy-relevant actions that we should all map up in this time frame. We are not at point zero. We have a huge wealth of information, and we would like to work with our partners that before they start this dialogue, they have a look at these information, they refer to the information. This was the case in Canada, for example. Canada, we learned when we were launching it in Edmonton, it was interesting that we have been informed that Canada is one of the very few countries who have updated or improved voluntarily their NDCs, and our partners from the cities, they are excited to see that, and they know there is a deficit in 2030 goals, but with this now an enhanced vision for local and regional governments in the new revised NDCs, they are much more committed to take a new role in this implementation phase, and that will be further discussed in ICLEI World Congress in Montreal in June. I'd like to conclude with some testimonials of the Talanoa Dialogues from the presidencies, UN, and different levels of local and regional governments. And we will continue these webinars in the next months. Every month we have a webinar, and we'll like to continue with this exchange of information. Obviously, the next couple of days are important. We are aware some of our partners are already preparing their submissions. Our vision as ICLEI is that the vision of how we develop this Talanoa Dialogue can be a good opportunity for a submission for the the third one, which is on the way forward. But each organization are also invited to prepare their own submissions. But we're also realistic that we should not overload, because there will be a synthesis, and we should be concrete and succinct in our submissions. That is our input from our side. Jisun, I think the floor is yours at the moment for the moderation of the session.
Thank you, Yunus, for your presentation, which gave us a lot of more details on the current progress made on the Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues initiative. Before we open the floor for the questions, and actually I currently see one question by Andy at the moment. As Yunus mentioned, I would like to give the first opportunity to Sunandan, who is here with us, who is Senior Program Manager of Global Projects of ICLEI, who conducted actual Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues on the ground. So Sunandan, if you can give us more details of your experience of having done this, I am going to unmute now. Sunandan?
Yeah. Thanks,
Hi.
Jisun.
Over to you.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. And just to add to what my colleagues Jisun and Yunus have just spoken about, and Yunus mentioned in his presentation that in the beginning of March, we organized some Talanoa Dialogues. So these were the Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues that were organized in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. And this was all between the 5th and the 9th of March this year. We organized these dialogues as part of the Ambitious Cities Promises project. This is a project that's funded by the German Federal Ministry for Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety as part of their International Climate Initiative, ICI as it is commonly known. We were able to do so because one of the components of this project is also to promote multi-level climate governance. So we leverage the resources available under the project to organize these dialogues in each of these countries. What we did was we actually positioned these dialogues for them to be hosted by relevant government agencies. So as Yunus mentioned, that the one in Indonesia, the one that he saw the picture in his presentation, was hosted by the Office of the President's Special Envoy on Climate Change. In the Philippines, it was organized by Pasig City, which is part of Metro Manila, for those of you who are not familiar with it. And in Vietnam, it was hosted by the Vietnamese Institute for Urban and Rural Planning, which comes under the Ministry of Construction. And I think this positioning of who hosts these dialogues was very critical because it enhanced the legitimacy of these dialogues within the national context. It helped ensure the participation of key representatives from all levels of government, and also created avenues and opportunities for the uptake of the outcomes of these dialogues. And in doing so, it also then offered the national governments with an opportunity to include these dialogues in the reporting that they would be doing to the UNFCCC in terms of their initiatives for the Talanoa Dialogues. The dialogues themselves, we structured them around the 3 guiding questions. So we had presentations and group discussions. Most of the group discussions were also around in terms of the how question, in terms of how do we get there. Those were actually broken down in terms of identifying some of the current and emerging challenges in implementing the NDCs and other relevant and existing policies and legislations, also identifying good practices that can be upscaled, and how can you actually increase synergies between the different levels of government. So these group discussions led to the identification of opportunities and actions for greater integration and collaboration between different levels of government. And now that's something that we are looking to take forward as part of our project as well. So there were, for example, some of the sectors that were identified which are there within the NDCs, as well as critical issues that cities also face are around, say, waste and transport, which in the NDCs is part of the energy sector as it is identified. So these are, say, directly sectors that the national and local and regional governments can actually work a lot more closely together. There were also identified opportunities for collaboration. For example, there was a request for increased resourcing for existing programs. An existing program in Indonesia, which is the Climate Kampung program, or ProClim as it is known. And this, where it actually looks at strengthening local governments and local communities in terms of their climate actions. And that was felt within the Indonesian dialogue that could help contribute to meeting the NDCs of the country. So I think we also came up then with a lot of the process of doing so. It was also a learning for us, but I think overall it was really very well received by all levels of government, and just the interaction, the opportunity for the interaction between cities and national governments for them to actually understand what each other what each of them is actually doing was very important. And I believe we have identified some key action points that we can now take forward, both as part of the project that we are implementing, and also that we can then submit to the respective national governments for them to then consider when they organize from their perspective, when they organize Talanoa dialogues in their respective countries.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Sunandan, for your detailed reports on your dialogues on those three countries. I think that it really provides a concrete picture of what it actually is necessary on the ground to actually implement NDCs, as well as to discuss how to enhance synergies for enhancing ambition. With that, I would like to take the first question from Andy, which with regards to the IPCC's role on the UNFCCC process and its research on the role of cities. So the question is, will there be a formal IPCC report on the role of cities? Otherwise, what are the main outputs from from the recent IPCC Cities Conference? What is the status within the IPCC and UNFCCC? What is their status within the IPCC and the UNFCCC process? So thank you, Andy, for this question. I would like to take the first part of this question regarding the IPCC report on cities. As you know, the current AR6 cycle has the cities as one of the cross-cutting themes for their work, but it is actually at the next cycle, at the AR7 cycle, where the IPCC will issue this special report on cities. So we are very much looking forward to building upon our cooperation with the IPCCs, especially following the outcomes of the Cities IPCC conference. And its relevance to the UNFCCC process, it will have to see how, I don't know, Yunus can provide more details as to what the discussion was in Canada as to whether or not the IPCC 1.5 special report has an element on the urban side. But other than that, during the SBS 48, there is going to be there's an agenda item under Substa on a research and systematic observation. So this agenda item looks at the science policy interface under the UNFCCC, and IPCC is one of the members of the mandated events, the 10th meeting of the research dialogue that will take place during the May sessions. So I believe some of the updates might be shared at this opportunity, but more on this, Yunus, I believe you can provide your answers.
Thanks both for Andy for raising the question and Jisun, your explanations. I just have to add the official report of the Cities IPCC conference will be presented for It's their consideration to IPCC plenary in October. But as first outcomes, we know there will be a very detailed research agenda that is announced at the press conference, and a number of networks have also announced their support to take it forward. As Jisun mentioned, this is not a daytime event. We're talking about the next decade, for example, on what type of gaps that has to be analyzed, and in particular the areas where, for example, informal settlements or governance challenges or innovation is the things that has to be much more addressed, because these are the areas where local and regional governments can contribute to the IPCC and UNFCCC. So the official things could come up at the end of the year at the COP24, building on the decision of IPCC in October, which will be held in Korea. But meanwhile, the parties or let's say urban community will continue. There is a declaration announced from Edmonton, also the local government networks and the leaders of the political leaders. This will be discussed further in actually this week in Brussels. There will be an announcement from the Global Covenant and European Commission. There will be a further discussion in Montreal. The Edmonton Declaration on evidence-based, evidence-driven and science-based policies at the local level would be further strengthened, and we will continue also the discussion at the Resident Cities Congress here in Bonn, among others.
Thank you, Yunus. I see no other questions raised and no other hands raised. Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to raise your hands and ask questions, because now is the time for you to contribute to the discussion now by raising questions. And in the meantime, till we get any further questions, is there anything you would like to add, Yunus, on the first part of my presentation regarding the Talanoa dialogues?
Actually, there is an input from Sarah. Also, she was from the organizing committee, which I just noticed her name. Maybe we can refer to her response, because that's a valuable contribution.
Right, I see Sarah's question. So let me read it first. Hi, I'm from the IPCC Working Group 1 Technical Support Unit. There is a strong presence of urban in the report. It will be released in October. So yes, thank you, Sarah, for sharing this. I believe this is more of a complementary comment to the IPCC question that Andy raised, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And as Jisun mentioned, both during the Resident Cities Congress and at the Research Dialogue in the SPs, there will be further discussions. And our logic is that when we are organizing our Talanoa dialogues, we would feed our colleagues about the outcomes from cities IPCC, because let's refer the decision of IPCC or the conclusions, or let's say the new facts from IPCC is taken up by UNFCCC for political action, and vice versa. The direction from the COP decisions guide the IPCC research. So we're excited that now with this IPCC UNFCCC focusing on cities at the Talanoa dialogues, or all levels of government in the Paris Agreement, and then cities IPCC, the national governments, especially in the second version of NDCs, they can be much more, let's say, motivated and even feel the pressure that they should open their NDCs more actively to the urban actors or urban communities. That would be the long-term impact of this process. That's why we are saying that this is an important input to the Talanoa dialogues that can build up for the next round.
Thank you, Yunus. In the meantime, we have another question from Warap Porn. Can the national local governments input to the Talanoa dialogue? after 2nd of April. So I believe this question refers to the submission deadlines. Thank you for this question. So yes, you can submit your input to the Talanoa Dialogue through its portal, the website set up by the UNFCCC Secretariat. The 2nd of April deadline is important in a sense that the submissions that are coming in by that cutoff deadline will then be captured in a synthesis report that the Secretariat will produce under the guidance of the presidencies. But even if you send in your submissions after the 2nd of April deadline, it will still be uploaded and visible on the portal for everyone to see and to think about, of course. And then I believe the inputs, the submissions that are coming in after the 2nd of April deadline, and also before the 29th of October deadline, will then be captured in the second synthesis report by the Secretariat, which will then capture the year-long process of the Talanoa Dialogue in preparation for the political phase of the Talanoa Dialogue to help ministers deliberate on the outcomes of the Talanoa Dialogue. And Yunus, would you like to add anything more?
No, as you pointed out, this is a year-round process. We are expecting also new events to be announced even after 2nd of April. So feel free to stay in touch with ICLEI or the other local government network partners if you would like to engage yourselves. It was particularly the case, for example, in the case of Indonesia and Philippines. We had also partners from other stakeholders like WWF was active, who are already implementing One Planet cities charter. And in Edmonton, for example, there was a strong engagement with the scientific committee or indigenous people. So we are expecting that the events that the local and regional governments have been planning will also give opportunity for the other stakeholders to make themselves heard. One important thing that is the interesting thing is that at the moment we have not heard any national government to announce any Talanoa Dialogue event as such. So and let's remember that to organize an event at home is a voluntary process. But because local and regional governments have always been, the LGMA constituents have always been very active, we have been we're a couple of steps ahead, and I believe this would be helpful for national governments. But it's also possible during the year, especially after this May sessions here, that we may expect some national governments to step up to say that they will come in their own Talanoa dialogues, which we are more than happy, so that we can feed into this as well with our inputs or outcomes from our sessions.
Right. And we see no other hands raised or questions asked. Well, just to add on a little bit on the submission of the Talanoa dialogues. Of course, the guidance template has been released for non-party stakeholders, but they're intended as merely to guide the input and also to help create more succinct submissions, in the sense that the answers are kind of limited, if possible, to around 300 words maximum, in order to help the synthesizing process a bit smooth, I believe. So, but these are the pointers that the presidencies or the champions are kind of focusing on. But at the same time, I believe all the input can be also be more inclusive, and then as long as it helps to raise ambition and to also fulfill implementation of NDCs involving multi-level governance, I believe all the submissions will have valid points. With that, Yunus, I'm conscious of the time. We have 5 minutes left in this webinar. Would you like to provide any closing remarks?
No, thank you. Thanks for all the participants for their time, and we are happy to stay in touch to hear your experience and new events to shape up. Feel free to reach us. Our website, citiesandregions.org/Talanoa, would be open. We have already uploaded several documents there. and we are eager to continue also in the next round in Bonn in May.
Right, maybe I would like to then draw your attention, the group's attention to our next webinar. Maybe Yunus, we can move to that slide where our next webinar is scheduled. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a monthly webinar series that ICLEI conducts. So, as you can see, we do this twice a day, every month, in order to accommodate for different time zones globally. Our next webinar will be on the 18th of April at 10 and 16 o'clock Central European time. And these are every Wednesday, every third Wednesday of every month. So just for you to keep in mind that we have this monthly webinar series, and the next one is taking place on the 18th of April. And I hope today's webinar has been informative to all of you. And we always strive to provide as much information as possible based on the latest updates that we have emanating from both the global process coordinated by the UNFCCC, as well as the local and regional constituencies process summed up and coordinated by ICLEI. Through the Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues series. Since I see no further questions on the questions box or no other hands raised, I would like to close this webinar, and I would like to remind you once again, since this webinar has been recorded and it will be shared, the recorded webinar as well as presentation that we share today at today's webinar will also be shared with all of you. Now with that, I would like to thank you all once again for joining us today, and see you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.